Welcome to another installment of Defending Israel. I am your host, Rabbi Pinchas Landis. In this video, we will discuss the Arabs' zero-sum mindset towards the Jews and the vicious man who almost single-handedly created it. A common criticism of Israel is that the Arab violence and murder is just a response to the occupation of Judea and Samaria, aka the West Bank, or the blockade of Gaza. The Arabs just want to coexist as equals. Well, long before there was an occupation, or a blockade, or even a state, the Ottoman Empire, the last Muslims to control the land, had made it illegal for Jews to live in Palestine. Luckily, by the end of the 20th century, they were a terribly corrupt power and in their waning days. So the laws were easily circumvented. As the Jews started to return en masse to the land of Israel, local Arabs protested to the Ottoman authorities. When the British conquered Palestine in 1917, the Arab-Jewish relationship further deteriorated. 1920 and 1921 saw violent riots against the Jewish community in which Arabs wielding knives and clubs and stones burst into the Jewish community, homes were looted, synagogues were raided, women were raped, more than 50 were killed and hundreds more were injured. The British put down these riots with force, but in the end rewarded their architect, making the age-old mistake of putting radical elements into leadership positions with the hope that the role will normalize the personality. The British engineered Hajj Amin al-Husseini's election to the position of Mufti of Jerusalem, which was the Muslim leader of Mandatory Palestine. This bloody terrorist would dominate the Palestinian national movement for the next 40 years. In a complete kowtow to the terrorists, the British also began to limit immigration of Jews to Palestine. Under the Ottomans, the Jews were only allowed to visit a very small part of the Western Wall. They couldn't build a mechitza, the traditional partition between men and women. They could not bring chairs or benches to sit on during prayers. The British maintained this discriminatory status quo. On the eve of Yom Kippur 1928, the Jews attempted to protest this by bringing a portable mechitza to the Western Wall. The British demanded that it be removed. When it wasn't, they took it by force. That was the extent of the Jewish protest at the time. But the Mufti saw an opportunity and started spreading rumors that the Jews were attempting to destroy the Dome of the Rock in order to rebuild the temple. He would continue to rile up the Arab community, which would lead to more riots that would see 133 Jews murdered and hundreds more injured. The British were quick to blame the Jews. The 1929 Shaw Commission recommended that Jewish immigration be suspended until new policies could be created to remedy the problem. With Hitler's rise to power in 1933, Jews, seeing the proverbial writing on the wall, started fleeing Europe with few places to run to. In 1932, before he came to power, less than 10,000 Jews immigrated to Israel. But in 1933, 30,000 Jews immigrated. In 1934, more than 40, and in 1935, more than 60,000 Jews immigrated to the land of Israel. This influx outraged the Mufti and his clan. This led to more riots and more Jewish bloodshed. The British once again formed a commission to investigate the situation. The Peel Commission concluded that the unrest was due to the conflicting national movements and that the land should be partitioned into two states. In this proposal, the Jews would get less than 20% of Mandatory Palestine and the Arabs would get 70%. Jerusalem, even though it had a majority Jewish population, would remain under British control. Even though this was a horrible setup for the Jews, Zionist leaders accepted the proposal. The Arabs, led by Husseini, ultimately rejected it, and Jewish bloodshed continued. The Mufti also ordered a tax on Arabs who expressed support for partition. Given the Arab opposition, the British dropped the idea. With war on the horizon, Britain was looking to garner support in the Arab world considering the large amounts of oil it would need for war. To this end, the 1939 British White Paper severely limited Jewish immigration to Palestine over the next 5 years. It annulled the Balfour Declaration, saying that Britain had already fulfilled its obligation that it made to the Jews to build a homeland for the Jews and their ancestral land of Israel. And they made it that after 1944, Jews would only be let into Palestine with Arab approval, and that within 10 years, Palestine would be granted independence. This British white paper made it that Palestine would become a full Arab state with a small Jewish minority. Churchill called the white paper a surrender to Arab violence and another Munich. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain agreed, but said, "We are now compelled to consider the Palestine problem mainly from the point of view of its effect on the international situation. If we must offend one side, let us offend the Jews rather than the Arabs." All of this capitulating to the Mufti was just not enough and was not quick enough for him. So in 1939, instead of siding with the British, he offered his allegiance to the Nazis. On November 6, 1941, the Mufti arrived in Berlin. He threw himself into his role as the Nazis' most prominent Arab ally. He began broadcasting Nazi propaganda in Arabic. He summarized the agenda with the mantra, "Kill the Jews, kill them wherever you find them. This pleases Allah, history, and religion. This serves your honor. May Allah be with you." He actively recruited Arabs to fight with the Nazis. 2 full Balkan divisions, 2 Tunisian battalions, 1 Moroccan and 1 Algerian division. After Eichmann shared with the Mufti the original plans for the final solution, he was very impressed and asked him to send an expert to Jerusalem after the war was won to help him exterminate Palestine's Jews. He worked to convince both Italy and Germany to extend the final solution to Muslim countries that they already controlled. In 1942, there were a number of international initiatives to rescue Jewish children from Nazi-occupied Europe. Husseini learned of these plans and petitioned his Nazi friends at the highest levels to block them, guaranteeing that these children would end up in the gas chambers. Husseini might have had even a more active role in the final solution. Originally, Hitler planned to expel the Jews from the lands he controlled, not exterminate them. The Mufti encouraged him not to do this. He feared that those Jews expelled from Nazi-controlled lands would end up in Palestine. So after meeting with Husseini, Hitler officially outlawed the immigration of Jews from Nazi-occupied territories. On November 28, 1941, Hitler had a 90-minute meeting with the Mufti. Following that meeting, Hitler ordered General Heydrich to convene a conference to initiate the final solution of the Jewish question. This timing seems to be more than an irony. After the war, Husseini would escape from jail in France and a war crimes trial to the protection of Egypt. There he would continue to lead Palestine's Arabs and would ensure that they would completely reject the partition of Palestine in the most violent of ways. The Mufti, through force of arms, imposed his all-or-nothing approach to the conflict with the Jews upon his own people. It was Husseini, therefore, who ensured that his people ultimately ended up with nothing. Originally, the Mufti did not represent all of Palestine's Arabs. He likely didn't even represent a majority. Indeed, during all of the pre-state riots, many Arabs heroically saved their Jewish neighbors from the violence. Otherwise, the death toll would have been much greater. He had his internal rivals, but he made sure that they wouldn't stand in his way, not through political savvy, but rather through murder. Anyone who challenged Husseini ended up dead. This brutality would extend to King Abdullah of Jordan in 1951 after Jordan had conquered the West Bank and Jerusalem. He was assassinated by a Husseini loyalist because he was the Mufti's main rival for influence in Palestine, and it was rumored that he was pursuing peace talks with Israel. By the end of the Arab revolts, Husseini and his followers had killed over 900 of their fellow Arabs. With those souls died any hope of peace and coexistence. With such a bloody Nazi leading the Palestinian national movement for more than 4 decades and brutally suppressing any moderate voices, it's no wonder that today's Palestinians have not been able to move on from this zero-sum mindset. In our next video, we will begin to discuss the 1948 War of Independence.